Welcome to the Why Not podcast with me, Chrissy Hawkins. In a world where everybody asks you why, I'm here to ask why not. So sit back and relax or walk and listen and join me on this journey as we try to answer this never-ending question: what makes people say, why not? Hey guys, welcome back to Why Not. So today I have got Beth Davies on with me. So she is a personal trainer who specialises in pelvic health, and it's really important, especially for women in all stages of life. And if you do not look after it, it can cause a multiple range of symptoms, which Beth is going to explain about. And we talk a little bit about pre and postnatal, because it's not all about that, but it can affect women in different stages of life as well. So guys, if you do have any symptoms of issues, I hope you enjoy this episode, because it might actually give you a few light bulb moments as well. And especially, like, we do actually discuss what the pelvic floor is, in case you don't know what that is. So I hope you enjoy this episode, guys. So, hi guys, welcome back to Why Not. So today I have got Beth Davies on the podcast with me. So she is a personal trainer who specialises in pelvic health, which is something you may not know about, but I'm really excited to talk to her about. So welcome to the podcast, Beth. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks so much for having me on and for having a discussion about pelvic health.
It's brilliant. Like it seems like something that should be, to me in a sense, should be really obvious, but I think it's very underlooked in the fitness industry. So how did you get into this area of fitness?
So, I kind of completely agree with you that it sort of gets a little bit overlooked. And I first started my business about 9 years ago. And I kind of started on the premise that actually a lot of things, particularly around women, were kind of overlooked. So whether that was menstrual health or pelvic health, or, you know, where they are in their cycle, their nutrition needs, and the fact that women, more so than men, kind of have different seasons. And actually it's thinking about the season that a woman is in, and having had a baby is one of those, menopause is one of those, and thinking about like the challenges that women face around that. And I guess kind of set it up as more of like, a general fitness thing, and started to kind of work exclusively with women. And I always said that I wasn't going to just work with women, but I found myself just working with women. And as I started to, I guess, narrow down kind of who I was working with, started working with more pregnant clients and postnatal clients, and went through my own journey, having my family, and kind of seeing that for a lot of the clients that I was working with, the pelvic health aspect wasn't really being talked about within, what they might be doing in the gym, or, even in their 6-week kind of post-birth check. It was just like green light, exercise, ready to go. And women were experiencing symptoms and being like, no one's talking about these things. I didn't realise that I could leak, 10 months after having a baby. I thought I'd be fine by now. And these women also had, athletic goals, and they were active, and they'd been active pre-pregnancy, and they wanted to continue to be active to, do what they were doing before, and if nothing else, to be able to run after their kids. And yeah, it just kind of kept narrowing down. So yeah, that's kind of, a rather diluted way of saying where I've got to.
No, I suppose that's the really good way of saying it, because I suppose the fitness industry have had a kind of, obviously it's male dominated, so they've had a bit of, in a sense, issue with treating women like smaller men, but we're not. We're completely different. And I think that is only coming to the fore now. Like, there's a lot more people talking about like hormone health and women like training differently, and like even through your cycle, certain training is better for you than others. which before it would have been like, no, you're fine, just keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, I don't know about you, but I don't recall in my personal training qualification there being much chat about hormonal health or pelvic health or, you know, any of those things. And even when I did a pre and postnatal qualification, you know, I remember, well, one, being told I was now a specialist,
After a day, 2 days.
and two, I think in like the case study, I put someone on a treadmill at 6 weeks, and that was totally fine. You know, it's just the sort of, you know, the level of education, that depth of education, I think really needs to evolve. You know, and it's not for every trainer to talk about pelvic health, but just to be aware that it can influence how someone feels about themselves, what they're able to do, you know, how certain movements might not be the most appropriate at certain, you know, stages or, you know, or times of their life.
Yeah. So what kind of ways can this affect a woman? Like, you know, if their pelvic health, for one better description, you can use whatever words you want as well to describe it.
So, you know, we tend to think of pelvic health, kind of pelvic floor, just being something that, you know, someone might do some pelvic floor exercises if they've had a baby, or, you know, if they're pregnant and whatever. You know, and I always think about pelvic health being quite a broad term. So it can be anything from, you know, symptoms that someone might be experiencing. So that might be pelvic pain, it might be leaking, whether that's during exercise or not. It could be symptoms of prolapse, so things like heaviness in the pelvis, or, you know, noticing that you can't keep a tampon in. So you kind of have like the symptoms. There's things like, you know, bowel and bladder habits, nutrition, I think, is part of pelvic health as well. So it's actually quite like an expansive kind of holistic topic. And, you know, for me, it's often about communicating that pelvic health doesn't have to be a barrier to an active life, because for so many women, you know, and the research backs this up, that actually something like leaking stops women from exercising. And, you know, if a woman has been diagnosed with pelvic organ prolapse, which is like a descent of the pelvic organs, which leaves that feeling of heaviness, they quite often stop exercising because they've been told not to do this and not to do that. And, you know, it creates just, you know, this fear of movement and just a lot of inactivity, which for lots of my clients is important for their physical health, but also their mental health as well. And there's a big link kind of between pelvic health and mental health.
Yeah, I understand that. It's interesting that you mentioned the leaking, because, like, I suppose that's almost like a running joke that if you have kids, that's going to happen and that's it. Like, you don't do anything about it. It's just part of life. But it doesn't really have to be like that, does it?
No, not at all. And I think that's it. And I think for women, a lot of the messages that they perhaps receive, whether that's from their healthcare provider or just, you know, the little jokes they have with their friends about, oh, don't go on the trampoline kind of thing, is kind of keeping them there, and that they've chosen to have a baby and therefore they have to deal with leaking or prolapse or whatever it is. And actually it takes quite a lot of, you know, guts for women to say, no, I'm not going to accept that, you know, I can't run without leaking, or I have to live with this for the rest of my life. Because quite often, yeah, just, you know, pop a pad in and, you know, kind of everyone's, you know, oh, it happens to everyone if they're running or jumping, or, you know, God forbid you get on a trampoline.
Yeah.
You know, and certainly within fitness, where we kind of, you know, sort of glorify, you know, intense workouts and PRs and lifting, and that almost like leaking occurs as sort of part of it's kind of just part of that.
Yeah.
And it's always that thing about it is not only it's something that you don't need to tolerate, it's perhaps a signal that there's something going on in the body with a particular movement that perhaps needs a little bit of looking at.
Yeah, and that's good to, I think it's really good to note that as well, because as I said, like, it is those jokes, and it's like, well, it happens to everybody, but there's a lot of things I find, especially women's health, like, and it comes back to like the hormonal health and stuff, you know, like people have really severe PMS and they don't actually have to have severe PMS. That's a sign of something else, and people are just like, well, that's just the way it is, but it's not.
Yeah, and often that comes from, like, you know, the conversations they may have had with, you know, the family doctor, or, you know, someone who has kind of brushed it off as, well, that's your normal kind of thing, leaves no kind of opportunity for someone to say, is it, like, hang on, you know, because we kind of take what we're told, and, you know, those painful periods, well, actually that is my normal. And not encouraged to ask more questions, or to, you know, to say, well, like, you know, I want to find out a little bit more, I want to find out why that is.
Yeah. Do you find if people are talking, well, I'm kind of guessing if people are talking about this, you kind of have with the knowledge going, well, you don't have to be like that. Do they find that hard to believe?
Yeah, I think they do. I think, and I often think it can take, well, the research backs this up, that it takes a long time for people to perhaps get into, you know, that action stage. You know, when we, you know, PT stuff, and they did like that kind of consideration thing and behavior change, and it can take a long time for people to move through that. So that could be down to lots of different factors. It could be down to, you know, time. I find that it can come down to someone being able to prioritize their health and their needs. And that might happen, for example, when, you know, someone's children go to school and they feel like, oh, now I have some time and some space and some energy for myself. That often marks a point where people start to seek some answers.
Yeah. And when, like you said, kind of like there's a whole range of different things. When you get clients coming in, is there any, like, say, specific tests you do, or we just kind of go off how they're feeling, or, you know, is there kind of a structure, or kind of, it can be client to client basis, I know, as well?
Yeah, so a lot of my clients will have seen a women's health physio, and likely they will have done an internal assessment. So quite often they have been diagnosed already with, you know, pelvic organ prolapse, or they have experienced leaking and have gone to get some answers, and the physio, very rightly so, has been their first point of kind of contact, or port of call. And I take quite an in-depth kind of history, so almost like trying to pull the pieces together. Was there something, for example, about the type of birth they had that actually, you know, has perhaps contributed to some of the symptoms? You know, has there been an injury which, you know, might have been years ago but can still influence what's going on today? Could they be perimenopausal? So I tend to take that history, and I look at how they breathe, because breathing can have a huge influence on the pelvic floor. Look at how they breathe, look at how they move. Sometimes we will look at the movements that are causing them problems and think about how we can work back up to those movements so that we are kind of keeping them symptom free. I use a lot of strength-based programming to support people back to doing perhaps what they were doing before. So whether that was running or or, you know, lifting or CrossFit.
That's interesting as well, saying the strength-based program for people who are running. And I think that's another thing that's, I suppose, say coming to the fore is like, you know, strength training goes hand in hand with cardio training for people who are training as in any form of like field and running sport like that. Which, you know, previously before, you know, if you want to get back running, you just keep running.
Yeah, totally. And I think, you know, I love strength training, so I am totally biased. But it allows you to, you know, build back up full body strength alongside pelvic floor strength or coordination or functional, whatever, you know, you're working on from a pelvic health perspective, so that, you know, when someone does go back to what they're doing, they often feel better, stronger, they're often faster if they're going back to running. So all of that stuff, you know, really benefits people. You know, women who are, you know, lifting babies or toddlers or carrying the shopping or whatever it is, ultimately that's, you know, that requires strength, and therefore strength training plays a role. And it's a really nice way to build someone back up, but also being able to notice perhaps where symptoms kick in a little bit more, and think, well, what is it about that movement or, you know, that position that is kind of like, you know, there's some symptoms there, but they weren't when we're taking it back a little bit. So it's a useful way to really, I guess, narrow down the elements to work on.
Yeah, you know, that's really interesting as well. I like the way you mentioned as well, you know, the lifting babies and carrying shopping at that as well, because I'm sure you've come across this before when you've got people coming to the gym and you're asking them to lift weights and they're like, oh, I don't want to get bulky. But like, you're lifting your kid who could be 5, 10, 15 kilos, depending on the size of them, the age of them, and you're not even thinking about it.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of, you know, clients who've been through pregnancy and, you know, they perhaps haven't exercised much, or they haven't known what to do, because advice around, you know, pregnancy and exercise is a bit of a minefield, like lots of these areas. Yeah. And they get to that point and they're like, I feel really weak. And actually you want them to feel strong, because they are lifting babies and buggies at the same time. They're, you know, juggling a million things. They've got a baby strapped to them and 3 bags of shopping. And you know, life is strength training, isn't it? So, yeah, you know, everything's like a strength exercise in my head. So yeah, I think it's important to help them overcome the fear of perhaps, you know, using some load.
Just because it's in a certain shape doesn't change what you're doing, like.
Yeah, so it's a lot more, you know, I know there's, you know, lots about functional, you know, fitness and training, and I think, yeah, you know, a squat's important, so we're doing those all day, and a deadlift, you're always going to be picking something up off the floor, and it's like, yeah, it's marrying those two things together.
Yeah, it's interesting you're talking about pregnancy. Do you have many clients who are pregnant, or is it more kind of post-pregnancy that they come to you, do you find? Or
kind of have a mix, really. Tends to be more post-natal clients, and I am working with a few pregnant clients at the moment, and they tend to be clients who have existing pelvic health concerns, and they're wanting to continue to move through pregnancy, but they're also wanting to make sure things aren't getting any worse, and they're wanting to, with my pregnant clients, I talk about the recovery before they've had the baby, so that kind of like things are in place for when the baby arrives, that they're able to get some of those, you know, kind of elements of healing in already, and they've kind of got that in their mind, because once you have a baby, like anything that you kind of plan to do or whatever sort of just goes out the window, because you're so focused on, you know, just looking after a, you know, a little baby.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just thought it was interesting when you mentioned, there's obviously like people say conflicting things about training with pregnancy. There is more of a swing now to people being like, yes, keep exercising, keep strength training up as far as you can, because like that, it's going to aid your recovery. And it's great to see that now that there's more women who are like, just because they get pregnant, they don't stop, they keep going. Like I've had a few in the gym who are like nearly a week or so beforehand, they're still in doing classes, which is really good to see.
Yeah, like I said, the information, I think information is always improving, which is brilliant. And I think it's, perhaps we're stepping away from the don't do anything apart from something really gentle versus continue doing what you've always done until you feel like you can't do it. It's like there's a real, like everything in fitness, in life, there's this like middle-y grey kind of messy bit in the middle, and a lot of the time it's about helping people kind of like navigate through that based on their own experience, how strong they are, how fit they are, mindset around it, because that can be quite challenging to almost like take a step back a little bit and not going all the way over to don't do anything apart from, some really gentle stuff. But equally, as the body changes,
you have to change.
Your training might also change, and you are not giving up on your athletic goals, but you're just really in tune with the season that you're in and what's going on with your own body.
Yeah. Do you think that's an issue the fitness industry has had? It's a bit too black and white.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's every industry. I don't know about you, but I think, yeah. And I think social media, because that's where people often get a lot of the information, it's easier to say, do this exercise or don't do this exercise, rather than have like a post which is like a discussion post and there's some nuance and
you can do all of this.
Yeah,
and the benefits of both of these.
Yeah, it's never as simple as like yes or no. It's usually like it depends, or based on this, or the evidence would suggest. And I think critical thinking is quite difficult when we're used to absorbing lots and lots of information really quickly. We're scrolling through, we are being served things because of what we might have looked at before. Some of that decision making can be quite tricky.
Yeah, it also doesn't help that something that sounds controversial or something that tells you something straight out tends to get more traction. So then it's more likely to come up than the one giving you a very nice explanation about why it's all good for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm totally with you on that.
So when it comes to like the pelvic health, so are you kind of predominantly focused on strengthening up the pelvic floor, or would it be like kind of all muscles around the kind of pelvic region, like your glutes, your kind of hip flexors, that kind of thing as well? Or is it kind of more with building the pelvic floor? Do you find people have more issues with it?
It's both of those things. And we can, if we only focus on just the pelvic floor, you're kind of missing out on that opportunity to strengthen everything else. Our bodies are not little isolated bits. The pelvic floor is part of one system, part of the core system, that's part of a wider system. So it's for my clients, where I start is with the idea of like connection to the pelvic floor. So feeling what that's like to relax the pelvic floor, because a lot of my clients struggle to kind of let it go, or to let it relax. And also on the flip side, what it feels like to connect to it and feel it move and feel it lift and then lower, and then building that idea into movement, and then depending on what their goals are, might be adding load, it might be building up tolerance to impact. So it's kind of starting with the pelvic floor, but actually there's a whole person to think about, you know, and also thinking about how someone feels about their pelvic floor or their pelvic health can be a big factor as well.
I suppose actually one thing I probably possibly should have said before as well is the, like, where is the pelvic floor? I know, like, and you know, I think people know of it, but they probably don't actually know where it is, which is probably why you're like saying they don't know how to connect to it, because they don't know where it is. Like, I would say a lot of it is, isn't it?
Yeah, and the pelvic floor muscles are a group of muscles, and they run from the coccyx to pubis, or pubis to coccyx. It's almost like a sling or a hammock. And they're responsible for supporting the pelvic organs, for, you know, I would say, like, doing the right thing at the right time. So keeping someone dry, relaxing when you go to the toilet, you know, relaxing when someone has a baby, and relaxing and stretching when someone has a baby. They're important for sexual function. So they have lots of kind of like different roles to play. And one of the things that my clients often talk about is, like, understanding about that anatomy really helps them, one, to kind of like, how do I connect? Like, oh, like, there it is. I was trying to do this, or, you know, I was perhaps pushing down because no one had ever explained that actually they come together and then they lift up. But also I work with lots of clients who their pelvic floors tend to hold quite a lot of tension.
Okay.
And one of my clients, we were talking about the anatomy side, and she said it was really useful to know that it was almost like a, you know, a sling or a hammock which could move, because she'd been so focused on trying to keep this muscle straight like this and to not let it move, that actually for her to know that really helped her to relax her pelvic floor, and really improve her symptoms that way.
Yeah, this was, I was just thinking there, like, I hadn't actually said that, because, you know, I suppose it's kind of one of those buzzword words, isn't it? Like your pelvic floor, your core, what people like probably don't know where that actually is, or like that, especially the fact it's a hammock kind of style. Like, so even me, I remember seeing that like on anatomy when I was learning. I was like, that's what that looks like. What? Is that a floor?
Yeah, and I think the idea that it's called a floor perhaps leads us to this idea that it is perhaps like here. But, you know, that idea of like a hammock, I think, is a really nice analogy, because if you think about a hammock, like, if it's like that, it's too tight, you've pinned it between those two trees, you can't blooming sit on it because you're going to fall off because it's so tight. But equally, if it's too loose or too lax, then you're not, it's going to, you know, be on the floor or something like that. So it's quite a useful way to like help someone visualize where you kind of want that hammock. So you want to be able to sit in it and relax and chill and sleep, versus, you know, not even be able to get onto it because it's so tight, or be sat on the floor because it's actually it's kind of a bit too loose and too lax.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good way of explaining it, actually. I'm going to remember that one. So when people come to kind of work on these kind of things, how long can they expect it to take, or is it really like person to person?
It's really person to person, and it completely depends on someone's symptoms and their experience, whether they are like early postnatal and they're also on that kind of like postnatal healing journey, perhaps alongside some other pelvic health symptoms. Some clients they're perhaps bothered by leaking with a particular movement. So it might be they're at a gym class and they leak when they do something specific. And quite often that might be a shorter time span to work together, because we can really look at what's going on in that movement. And it's not always, we have to work on strengthening the pelvic floor. it could be that they're holding their breath in that movement because they're worried what's going to happen, or you know, that they're holding lots of tension because, again, they're just like, the more tension we give it, kind of like the better the movements or whatever it is. So, you know, some clients I work with for a couple of months, other people, you know, 6 months, or even longer.
Yeah. And if someone is, say, postnatal and they're coming to you, how long postnatal should they wait before they start?
So there is a 6-week checkup with a GP, which varies in how good it is in quality, you know, and typically we used to say wait until that 6-week check before you start doing anything, but actually, if I'm working with a pregnant client, she's got a little plan for that first 6 weeks before she goes to see a doctor. So yeah, and a lot of people will come around about that 3-month mark where they're like, oh, I thought I'd be, you know, a bit further on than where I am at the moment with my healing. So it totally depends. And that 6-week check can often be just a couple of questions. And particularly with COVID, a lot of those checks were either just done on the phone or they haven't even happened.
Yeah, I get you. I suppose they really do need to be going to like a female health physio after something like that, more so than the GP, which again, it's nothing against the GP, but they're not really trained in a sense to deal with that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And I think, you know, that certainly where I am, there is an automatic referral for some women, depending on perhaps the nature of the delivery that they have had. So if they have had, I think it's a 3rd-degree tear, which means there's been quite significant tearing to the muscles, they will automatically be, you know, referred to an NHS physio. But, you know, my dream would be for everyone to see a pelvic health physio, like, you know, like you said, rather than the GP, because the GP doesn't have that specialist training, whereas a women's health physio does, you know. And countries like France and all new mothers offer, you know, a whole series of, you know, physiotherapy sessions.
Yeah.
You know, we're not there doing that, which is a real shame.
Yeah, as well. So I'm in Ireland, so if I can't imagine they're doing it either, to be honest. Because, well, we don't even have like the likes of the NHS, so I would say it's a GP visit as well, unless you're kind of organising it yourself. But I think it's, you know, it's interesting to say that, like, you know, they're only getting the referral if it's like a grade 3 tear, but just because there's no tearing or no issues, whatever, doesn't mean that everything's fine either.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there is so much healing that happens after that magical kind of 6-week kind of sign off, you know, that is ongoing across that first 6 months, first year, perhaps even longer. And yet, you know, the assumption is that 6 weeks, everything should kind of be, you know, sorted out and, you know, healed. And some women, their healing time is a lot quicker. So yeah, it's difficult to kind of say there's like a specific like time, but it just takes longer than we think, because the tissues are healing, the more damage there has been, whether that's been the nature of the delivery, that would take some longer healing time. So, you know, for many women who just want to get back to what they're doing, you know, that idea of slowing down and taking their time can be really challenging, particularly if they are feeling really good, they're kind of ready to go, you know, it's a challenging one to sort of step back and kind of, you know, build back up.
I suppose as well, it can also be kind of difficult if you're told 6 weeks and you don't feel right after 6 weeks. You can almost be like, well, what's wrong with me? They told me it'd be 6 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other side is, yeah, this magical kind of 6-week number, and then you're not healed, you're noticing symptoms, then yeah, that leads to people being like, well, why me? And you know, it's still not something we talk about a huge amount. And then that leads to, you know, more feelings of feeling like, oh, I'm sort of by myself and everyone else is off doing buggy boot camp, or they're back running and I'm experiencing this. And you know, that can be quite isolating for people.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine that as well, because you just, as you said, like it's not really talked about. They are just going to be like, well, what have I done wrong? My body's not perfect again. Which I think is why we need to, like, maybe they should say 6-week checkup is like a guideline, you know, not a set in stone. You should be good to go. Bye. See you later.
Yeah, it always always used to like warm my heart when I used to see on like a screening form, you know, I'd ask about have you been cleared for exercise by the GP, where someone would write, you know, yes, gentle exercise, low impact exercise in terms of what they'd be cleared for, because it shows like an understanding of it. It is a case of kind of, you know, building back up and not going, you know, 6 weeks, that's it, I'm doing park run, or you know, I'm back doing lifting the weights that I was before, or whatever.
I suppose, well, if you took 6 weeks off from training in general without the whole what you're doing there, well, like, you know, giving birth to a child, you shouldn't be going back to what you're doing straight away anyway, because a quick way to injure yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Like almost like pelvic health aside, and perhaps particularly if people haven't trained during pregnancy, then yeah, going from, you know, perhaps just walking to going back to exactly what they're doing can just be like challenging in itself.
I think we forget that, like, you know, as well, like, you know, it's not just a case that you're healing, but if you have not trained for months, if it was me or you who took, you know, 6 weeks off, or, you know, even I take a week off, and then and when I go back, I go, I'm not going to go to what I was doing last week because I took a week off, you know, but it's almost like forgotten about when it comes to pregnancy. Like, you have taken at least 6 weeks off, maybe longer. You won't be able to do what you could do before you stopped.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And I think it is saying that that is okay, and that you don't have to be at that level, but also recognizing that someone's athletic ability or their goals is really important to them, and finding a way to support them back to that, and support how they feel about that as well, because sometimes that can be the most like challenging part of it, is the brain is ready to hit the ground running, as it were, excuse the pun, but the body is actually perhaps not quite there.
I find that, I don't know if you've noticed this, I know you kind of work with predominantly women, but I feel like they take it to heart more when they can't do what they think they should be able to do, whereas lads kind of just get on with it. Maybe they feel crap, but they just won't tell us. But
yeah, I think quite often, for anyone, like perhaps like our athletic achievements are really important to us. They say something about us. They're like a part of our identity. And you know, when you've had a baby and you have this whole transition into motherhood, and it is all different, and you don't know what it's going to be like unless you've done it before, and even then it's different each time. It gives someone like something familiar to hold on to, and I think it's there as a little bit of an anchor to this is me. And it's almost like this is me, but also this is me as well. And, you know, there's more to think about. So it's complex from a psychological perspective as well.
I suppose as well, like becoming a mother, it's not just having a child, it is a whole new identity. You're not used to. It doesn't matter if you have one. Well, like if you have one before, yes, you'd be like, okay, well, I'm already a mom. But like, especially if you say like, you know, say being athletic was part of their identity, that's part of their comfort, you know, to want to be able to do that again.
Yeah, and it's not saying that that's a you know, you can't have that, but there's actually some, you know, some considerations, some more considerations.
And you will get there again. You just have to be patient.
Yeah, and I think what you're not able to do in that moment where you feel like I'm ready to go, right, you know, I want to be in shape again, or I want to lift those weights again, or whatever, is it feels like 6 weeks is a long time to have not exercised, you know, or even longer if you know, weren't training during pregnancy. And you don't have the benefit of hindsight, because it just feels like I haven't exercised for so long, I haven't been in the gym and I miss it. But when you're able to look back, you'll realize that the time that you took to perhaps build up and recover, in the grand scheme of things, because you want to be doing the exercise you love for your whole life, is such a short space of time. But you can only appreciate that by being a bit further down the line and looking back and being able to say, oh yeah, 6 weeks was early. Actually, there was all this stuff going on, getting to, you know, grips with being a mum and not having much sleep, and, you know, feeding and all, like, you know, the a million things that you're sort of trying to deal with. But yeah, you only get that by looking back.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, it is, like, on the grand scheme of things, it is so much smaller compared to, you know, wait, you turn around and your kid's 30 and you're like, how did that happen? You'll forget about that 6 weeks in no time.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that is pretty much everything I have to ask of you today, because I think that was really, really interesting and really informative, especially that last little bit at the end. Though I do have one question I ask everyone that is completely different.
Oh, okay.
The whole theme. And that is, what is the best advice that you've ever been given?
Oh, that's,
and you can pick more than one.
That's such a good one. Slow is fast.
That's good.
And I think that applies to so many things, whether it's, you know, recovering from a baby and getting back to things. It's, you know, whether it's, you know, building a business or whatever, like, we always want to be somewhere else, somewhere further along. And I often think there's a lot of like beauty, or just, yeah, whatever it is, in just seeing where we are and noticing like the good things about that.
Yeah, I love that. That is so good. And it's so,
and I can't remember where it came from, but it always like pops into my head when I'm like, you know, I'm not further along with things, or clients are like, when am I going to get to this bit? You know, it is quite grounding.
Yeah, no, actually, there's something I need to write in my whiteboard, actually, because I get like that as well. It's funny because when you speak about business, I can be like that, but when it comes to my training, I'm like, yeah, if it takes like 4 weeks for me to add 2.5 kilos, it's fine.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? In different contexts, it becomes easier in some than others.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. But yes, I love that. Can you tell everybody where they can find you, Beth, before you go?
Oh yeah, totally. So I'm on Instagram, and I am at Beth Davies Coaching. It's IES in the Davis, so Davies, pronounced Davis, or on my website, which is www.bethdaviescoaching.co.uk, and there's free resources on there, stuff to download. There's blogs talking about different elements of pelvic health and, you know, symptoms and all sorts of things on there as well.
Yeah, and I think, as you're saying as well, it's not just a pre or postnatal thing. It can help so many different stages in life and different symptoms as well. Just a reminder, if anyone is listening to this and thinking it's just a pre or postnatal thing, because we did kind of talk about that a bit more, it's one of the obvious ones, I suppose. But if you have any form of those symptoms, get on to Beth, she can help you with it. And for everyone, for me, as usual, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok. It's Chrissy H Fitness, and my website is www.chrissyhawkins.com. So just want to say thanks again for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been really lovely chatting.
I really do appreciate everybody who listens to this podcast. So if you please could help me with the algorithm and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And even, if you want to reach out and suggest topics for me, I'd be delighted to hear from you. Drop me a DM on Instagram or TikTok. And thanks again for listening.